Hey everyone, welcome to the 2021 Solo Print and Play audio chat. I'm your host Andy, and today I'm joined by Ronan Stafford, speaking about his game in this year's contest called Audrey versus the Poison Dreams. Hey Ronan,
Hey Andy, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Yeah, doing really good and excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be speaking with you. And before we get started, if you could let's kind of tell us about your experience, your background in board game design, and what has got you to participate in contests.
Yeah, so I started designing board games as a hobby about this time last year, so I'm still feel very new to everything. And my first design was actually for the 2020 version of the Solitaire Print and Play contest. I've entered, a couple of contests since then because I enjoyed it so much, and it's been something I want to repeat and keep going. And now I'm back for the 2021 contest with my game Audrey. So going back to kind of summer last year, so I live in kind of the north of England, so we've been under kind of extensive lockdowns for a while now, and I think as you do, you slightly run out of things to to spend your time on. So one of the things I did to occupy me was I just started almost like just doodling or just playing around with a notebook in terms of what did a board game kind of design look like just based on a bell curve of probabilities. I had like a really basic game based on kind of modifiers that made events even more or less likely, and just trying to match them on a bell curve and working out the maths. And I thought after working out the theory, which was kind of reinventing the wheel of established board game design, but hey, it was something to do with my time. I decided that it was worth actually trying to put it into practice. So I took my kind of notebook filled with notes and kind of particularly basic maths, and designed a really kind of basic game around that. Now I was really looking, but I had about kind of a gaming group of friends, and we shifted onto Tabletop Simulator when the lockdown hit us, so we could keep doing something sociable and keep playing. And it lets me take over some of our kind of tabletop simulator sessions with my work in progress designs, which at the start were not good at all. There's a lot of heavy randomness to the game, very little strategy, but slowly over time, kind of with bits of feedback from them, my game actually got better into something that I'd say was not horrible. So that's how I kind of really started designing board games. And then the contests itself, so whilst I was kind of going through this kind of early kind of play around with board game design, Shut Up and Sit Down, which is kind of a board game kind of review, kind of YouTube and podcast and kind of written reviews that they do, they published a number of videos on solitaire print and play, which I really enjoyed. So I decided to check out some of the entries they'd highlighted. And as I was doing this and kind of diving through the back catalogue of previous contests, I saw that the 2020 contest was up and running. So I thought, tell you what, I've got a game that's in progress. It's okay, it's not bad. Why not enter the contest, give it a go, and see what it's like? And then the contest itself was just an awful lot of fun. I got a lot more out of it than I was expecting to, which is absolutely brilliant. It was definitely initially just something fun to do with your time and a bit of your creative energies when other avenues were not open to you because of the lockdown. But I found that the feedback you were getting from other designers and other participants in the content was just really constructive, really kind of helpful and really inspiring. And also the requirement of the contest where you're not just creating your game in isolation, but there is this requirement to play other people's games and leave kind of constructive feedback. It was something that was really eye-opening in terms of seeing new themes or new mechanics that I hadn't seen previously, and also just forcing you how to think about how you analyze a board game, how you create useful feedback for someone. So that experience was really positive. And then loads of kind of extra positives kept coming from the broader community. So my game, Remember, got a couple video playthroughs on YouTube, one from Matt and One Player, and one from Livy at Solo Adventures. And it was just really cool just seeing someone build your board game, interact with it, think about it, give their view. It was just kind of a great experience. There's a BGG user called Uberdante who made like a version of the game on another online service, playingcards.io. So it was just this broader community in addition to the contest itself, just made everything really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, no, that sums up exactly my feelings from the contest last year as well. And as you said, it's really exciting to see somebody else play your game and actually make a video about it. I think that was really, really fun to watch.
Exactly. It was completely unexpected. Like when I entered the contest, I thought I'd get a couple, maybe one sentence comments from people saying, "Oh yeah, cool idea. Well, I tried it. It was all right." But all of a sudden, you get all of these extras, like, and the videos you can go and watch, and you send them to your friends and your family. It's a really cool experience.
With your entry last year, you happened to win a prize as well on that.
Yeah. So remember one prize for best rule book, which again, you're coming in as a completely novice designer to do well in the category, never mind win it, was really surprising and really exciting. So yeah, I won best rule book. I got kind of some strong placements in both the overall. I was in the top half, some of the categories. It was really exciting, and I think that then also drives me kind of the need to want to come back for 2021. I feel like I have a title I need to defend. I need to come back and do as well as I can in not just the best rulebook category, which I kind of feel is that's my ground. Like I need to keep it, but see what else I can do with the other categories, and that's essentially what leads us to Audrey this year. In that my board game this year kind of really started the minute the last year's contest closed, not necessarily in terms of the idea, the mechanics, but at least just the inspiration to go and do something.
Audrey versus the Poison Dreams, that's the name of your game. And your last game also had a bit about dreams in it. So you could tell us a bit more about this, and then how do the dreams actually play a role in your games?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a weird common theme. I might have to come back in 2022 and complete a trilogy on dreams. But it does us selecting the dream. So remember, it originally started as the kind of concept is you're going into the dreams of a child because they are computing the outside world around them, and when you sleep is when kind of a child does a lot of their kind of mental development in terms of understanding what have they seen, what have they experienced, start to kind of analyze it and break it down. And I've got kind of a toddler at home, so when you kind of read up a lot of books about kind of their own development, it was something I was just tapping into, something I was kind of seeing at the same time. So it gave me a cool theme to then go and work with. And I kind of felt, okay, that's a cool version of dreaming, but what does something different to do with dreaming look like, which is how I've ended up with Audrey and the Poisoned Dreams. So in Audrey, you play as the guardian of a dream forest, which is slowly being poisoned by nightmares. So you have to fight the nightmares, and throughout this process you discover clues which will let you defeat the poison once and for all. Dreaming itself, it's a bit of an odd one because I don't really dream myself. I'm one of those people that just, nighttime hits, I'll close my eyes, head hits the pillow, and I'm out for the count. So I kind of feel like it's a topic that I don't particularly relate to because I don't really dream. But the world of dreams is just so open to experimentation. It's open to being whatever you want it to be. It's so open to being kind of personal to each and every person. It's just a really cool blank canvas to go and do whatever you want with.
Ronan, if you could just tell us a bit more about how narrative plays a key role in your game, Audrey, but also in why you think it's important for other games as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a sketch from an Irish comedian called Darragh O'Brien that comes to mind, where he's talking about video games, but it applies to board games. But he says games are the only medium that actually, in terms of entertainment, test you in order to access more content. Like, if you're listening to a song doesn't start and then stop after the first 30 seconds and kind of give you a test saying, okay, what are the chords that are part of this song? Or if you're watching a movie or reading a book, you don't get to kind of go through the first bits of it and then the content stops, and you can only access it if you can write an essay on what themes you're seeing. But you do get this in board games and in video games, in that things have multiple levels, and if you don't pass that level, you can't proceed to all the others. So it's such a kind of different approach to narrative and to story because it has that difficulty setting and that challenge to it. And that's something I've tried to approach in kind of a novel way with Audrey, but it's a fun way to tell a story, and thinking of my design as not just a board game, but also trying to think of it when I'm kind of coming up with this stuff as a story you're trying to tell and trying to entertain people with. So that's come through in that there's various kind of intros and epilogues in each of the chapters I've put. The kind of role-playing game in the middle, role-playing is all about telling a fun story or an interesting story. So I hope that's something that comes across in the game, in that it's not just about the mechanics, it's not just about the gameplay, it's not just about moving cards from A to B or tokens from one location to another or counting up your coins, but actually there's a really interesting story to be told through board games. There's lots of kind of games that are starting to tell this in really interesting ways. If you think of like Gloomhaven or the new Descent, there's lots of kind of really cool narrative games, and it's just interesting to try and approach that through a print and play perspective. Bargain Basement Bathyspheres did this really, really well. I'm hoping this is just another interesting approach to it.
And how far have you progressed with your game in this contest?
So the game this year is actually kind of multiple chapters based, whereas my previous game was just kind of a one-time setup. So I've currently got 3 chapters released to the public, with the final 3 chapters work in progress. And the reason for having multiple chapters is just down to the design challenge I like to set myself. So every time I'm creating a game, I have a very specific design challenge. So with my first entry with Remember last year, I had kind of a less is more approach. So I had a low ink mentality first. I was very minimal on, say, the graphic design, the images, like everything was very plain, lots of kind of white space and really efficient with space. I wanted something that was really concise, really quick and easy to set up and play, something that was really straightforward to learn, because there's a really kind of limit the number of and complexity of the mechanics. So something that was kind of very small and kind of punchy and quick hitting. And I was really happy with the result. But once you feel you completed that challenge, it's like, okay, the question is what's the next challenge? And the next challenge is, what does a more is more approach look like? I've done less is more. What is more? More is more. And that's kind of how I've ended up with Audrey. So within the game itself is kind of bows heavily elements of it. It's essentially a dungeon crawler, even though it's not set in a dungeon. But because I have this more is more mentality, I wanted to throw more things at it. So it's not just a dungeon crawler, but it's also got legacy elements to it. But yeah, that's enough. Let's throw in extra stuff. Let's make it even more complicated. So there's these kind of role-playing mini games in between chapters. So that, I think, explains my progress in that. I feel I'm doing well. I'm making good progress, but it's a lot to try and throw together. And the challenge, in a sense, comes from taking on this more is more approach, and as a design ethos, but without letting it get out of hand. Because so much that I learned through, my first game in the contest last year was about how valuable it was to have something that's really quick to grasp, really quick to teach, something that has a kind of core central concept that you can kind of understand within seconds. So that's, I think, where I'm finding the fun of this, is having something that has all of these lots of different elements thrown in, but you've got to keep a lid on it. You got to keep things from getting out of hand and keep things really streamlined and really fun. And I think so far I've managed to do this with the first 3 chapters, but definitely check out the game. Let me know how you feel, and I just kind of try and need to land that now with the final 3 chapters.
Okay.
But definitely something I would mention is the amount of inspiration and learnings I took from the 2020 contest, and how much I learned from seeing other games. So when I'm designing Audrey, there's actually 3 previous games in the contest that have kind of served as the inspiration, which just in terms of teaching me how to think and how to approach a challenge like this. So the first game that's been really kind of inspirational and kind of provocative for me has been Bargain Basement Bathysphere, which I think is from the 2018 contest. But this was kind of long form narrative roll and write game, which was just really interesting how the story progresses. The sense of humor in the story is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic game. Lots and lots of fun, and that is why I've kind of approached a multi-chapter story here, because I wanted something that's a lot more narrative driven, in the same way that Bargain Basement Bathysphere was such a cool story and cool narrative. And then how you then actually go away and implement that. There's 2 games from last year's content that have informed my thinking there. So the first one is Shield of the Viking, which had kind of really interesting way of thinking about map movement. So it was essentially a tower defense game that had a single kind of enemy unit that would drop down the map almost like through a pinball machine, where you'd roll some dice and that would set a specific maneuver up, and it would bounce its way down, and then you could set up your various structures to try and defeat it. And that really inspired me to think differently about how do you move around a map. It was something that was really, really cool. And then I combined that with inspiration from another game, which was Heist, which was a game that was really creative in its cards, because it was based entirely on just a standard 52 deck of cards. It didn't have any kind of custom cards or custom pieces whatsoever, but the game was just so creative and clever in assigning different roles and different effects to different cards. It kind of made me see the possibilities, and it just made me want to play with a game that was based with a 52 kind of deck of cards. So you kind of throw all that together, the kind of those 3 examples, my game last year, the desire to play around with like a dream as a motif, and eventually this is how I've ended up with Audrey versus the Poison Dreams.
No, that sounds really exciting, and also you mentioned a lot of games that have inspired you. So just going back to kind of what is it that would make, in your opinion, a good solo game?
I think for me, it's understanding what is the need the player has when they sit down at the table, and design heavily for that need and prioritize for meeting that need. So my professional background is around kind of shopper and kind of consumer insight and business strategy, especially within grocery. So it means I can kind of spend a lot of my day just thinking about why do people pick up one product and not another? And I've kind of tried to translate that thinking into how I think about games and appreciate games, and kind of analyze games. So if you think gamers, we all have multitudes of tastes. It's very rare that you find someone who only plays one type of game. So there's times when I'll want to play something like Dixit or Sushi Go, which is kind of really light and fluffy and fun. There's other times where I want to get into, an engine builder that might be kind of moderate rate, like a Wingspan or a Parks, which I'm loving at the minute. There's other times where I want to go down the role play or kind of heavy combat route, and I want to play Gloomhaven. Or other times I want to get dug into a really heavy engine builder Euro game like Agricola. So it just depends what mood I'm in and what I want to get out of the experience. And I think that's what understanding that and being able to design around that is what turns a good game into a great game, whether we're talking solo games specifically or board games in general. So if I just provide an example of that thinking, let's say you're coming home, you've had a really busy day, you're really stressed, you're really tired, and what you need is just a bit of escapism to just relax and chill and enjoy. In that case, the design need is all about immersion. It's all about taking the player and really excelling with the world building. You need really engaging characters. You want a story that's built on strong emotions or really funny humor. Things like mechanics and gameplay, they're still important, but you just need to get these to, say, a good enough level. What the game really needs to do is excel on the immersion elements of the game. So from the design viewpoint, is then having that knowledge that, okay, I'm designing for that gamer who is probably a little bit tired, a little bit stressed, don't want something particularly heavy, they just want fun in a box or fun on a sheet of paper, and be able to prioritize your efforts. Or you might have a player who's in a different situation, and where they're coming from is actually they have the mental capacity and the desire to have a really strong challenge. They want to be really that kind of more kind of puzzle type game where they want to feel the satisfaction of kind of multiple forward planning moves coming together, multiple strands of action coming together into kind of one eureka big payoff moment when everything just transitions from chaos into order. So as a designer, if you're designing for that particular kind of playing need, then things like the immersion or the story or the characters, again, they're things you might want to invest a little bit of time into, but what you really want to spend a lot of your time and effort driving is that designing around the satisfaction of when that eureka moment happens, when that payoff moment happens, it is the most satisfying payoff you can have. And there's loads of needs out there. That's just like two I've made up, but I think that's what's the transition from a good game to a great game, and a good solo game to a great solo game, is being really clear in what's that mentality you're designing for, and making sure the game satisfies that desire as strong as it can.
That sounds really insightful, and I think it'll also help me right now because we tried to enter a game in the contest along with my co-designer, and we kind of decided to withdraw that. So still trying to enter in this year's contest because I really want to participate. I think what you said kind of makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
Also, just want to talk about in terms of your experience, you won an award for the best rule book. So what do you think makes a good rule book, and why are rule books important for solo games or games in general?
Yeah, I think I'd say they're actually more important for free print and play games than board games in general. But I feel like saying like welcome to my TED talk on the importance of rule books, because I don't think there's many people out there who, at least from a hobby kind of point of view within designing games, are probably as focused on rule books as I might be. But I think rulebooks, they're so important because they're an underutilized asset in a lot of the entries I've seen in these sorts of contests. And it goes back to, so in my professional life, a lot of the time is spent on analyzing the journey, what we call the path to purchase, which is basically what are the multiple touch points a consumer might have with your brand or with your product before they commit to actually buying it, and just understanding what is that tipping point that makes them follow through on a purchase. And you can analyze board game kind of the selection process through a similar lens. So rather than path to purchase, you might think of it as like path to commitment, that commitment of actually playing your game. So if you think about how, specifically within like a print and play contest, how do people discover your game? So they might see a title and that kind of intrigues them. They might see a little bit of the artwork in any kind of gameplay images. They might read a 2 or 3 sentence summary of the game. They might even watch a bit of a playthrough, and you're constantly drawing players in and intriguing them, but at this stage they're still not committed to playing your game. They probably still haven't printed off the components. They haven't really made that, if we're asking for money, they haven't made that purchase yet. What decides if they're going to commit and really play the game is the rule book, because before you potentially print off 20, 30 pages potentially of cards and various bits and pieces, you want to make sure you understand the game, that you're going to get some enjoyment out of it. So it is that the rulebook is that final step in people committing to playing your game. So if you then approach this as a bit of a design question, what would you do if you worked on the basis that the rulebook is the single most critical factor in someone's decision whether to play your game or not? All of a sudden rulebooks take on a massive importance, and all of a sudden your prioritization is to make sure that things like the graphic design in the rulebook are matching the quality and the detail of the playing components. You're making sure that your rulebook is really engaging. You want to design a specific kind of tone of voice that's appropriate for your game and consistent throughout everything you want to do. You want to put comprehension aids into your rulebook, things like kind of summaries as you go along, kind of clear headers. You want lots of pictures, lots and lots of pictures of gameplay, lots of worked examples so people can both explain something and see how it's done. You want humour if it's appropriate for your game, or bits of story to draw people in. You want a very clear logic and flow to what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And you want to prioritise clarity over brevity. We always want, the short rule book, but actually there might be times where it's more valuable having a longer rule book that is a bit more fun, a bit more engaging, a bit clearer, and it's just far more likely to convert that initial interest in the game into someone actually playing your game. And if you are worried about a rulebook getting too long, then there's things you can do to just keep people engaged. So one of the things I did with Remember, where I went through a similar process where I initially tried something that was quite short, but it just wasn't doing the job. So I felt the danger of the rulebook ballooning. I started inserting like little bits of narrative and little bits of story into the rulebook. So it meant you had kind of that reason to keep on reading, keep coming back for more, and it was just a fun way to explain things. So that's why I'm in a way kind of obsessed with rule books. And I think quite often in this contest you spend so much time and effort thinking you need to get your game right, and I mean you do. Your game needs to be fun, it needs to be really really kind of balanced and have engaging gameplay and all the rest. But so often I'll load up a game and it'll be kind of a quick kind of Google Doc. It'll just be a list of instructions, and that's absolutely fine for the draft stages and the work in progress stages where you're still figuring things out. But definitely as you get towards the end of the contest and you're really focusing in on getting people to play your game, that rulebook for me is the critical conversion, is the critical factor that's going to take someone who might have seen your game, read the thread on Board Game Geek. It's the rulebook that converts them from someone who's interested but is not going to engage into someone who is printing the game off and is playing and is hopefully loving the experience that you've created for them.
That sounds really nice, and I think a lot of like you did say, a lot of designers don't pay that much attention to the rule book. Maybe they should, and maybe all of us would get better at it listening to you.
Hopefully. Well, I definitely, I've already mentioned I'm here to defend my crown. I want to win it again. So I guess this is an open challenge, which I probably shouldn't be doing on a public forum, but just be like, come on, have a look at Audrey, see what I'm doing. If you think you can do better than me, I would love to see that, because it's such a learning experience seeing how people approach different elements of gameplay, and this is an element of gameplay that I think it is underutilized, and I want to see really cool examples, really creative thinking, and there's definitely lots of examples out there, but I want to see more.
That's great. I think so. For anybody that wants to accept the challenge, you can mention it down in the comment section later on as well. Great. So any other advice that you'd like to give to the listeners in terms of board game design?
I think it's being able to tap into the community, whether that's part of the contest itself or just kind of the BGG community in general. When you quite often when you start a thread, you have the letters WIP at the start, kind of work in progress, and just accept that everything is work in progress. I'm sure there must be some kind of established designer who's got more than my 12 months of experience out there, who has some sort of pithy saying that's, I don't know, good board game creation is 1% ideation, 99% iteration. But it's just about, you don't need to create something perfect and go public with the perfect product. What you need to do is create something that might be 30, 40, 50% of the way kind of there. Just a partial view of what you want it to be, and just put it out there and get comments on the rule book and the art and the graphic design and the game balance, and just crowdsource that, which is, it's absolutely amazing that you can crowdsource all of those sorts of comments from people with so much expertise and so much kind of unique views and unique lives and unique experience can all feed into your game. And you're getting all of this on Board Game Geek through, whether it's a contest or more generally, you're getting it for free, which is absolutely incredible. So I definitely, it's learning to be comfortable with the imperfect, it's learning to be comfortable with the work in progress and having that be the public face of your game, at least for a while, and then it really just leaning into how you can develop things over time. Definitely with Remember, I went into this as a novice designer thinking, my game's fair. There might be a few typos, a few little things I changed as a result of feedback when I first posted it. Oh, boy, was I wrong. The game evolved so much because it got so much great constructive feedback, and despite the amount of work that Evan had to go in and rework and change and rebalance things, it ended up a far better game because I was so open to feedback. So yeah, leaning into that work in progress status, that's your badge to say I'm allowed to have something that's perhaps not great, perhaps not good, that needs lots of work, but just lean into it and learn to love that work in progress status.
That's really very nice because I think for me as well, I think with Konkan Trail, that helped a lot. That was my first real solo game design and something besides roll and nuts that I was designing at that time. So it helped a lot and I'm happy with where the game is now, but it wouldn't have been where it is now without the contest and all the feedback that I received throughout the contest. Great. So something else that you're doing, Ronan, is you are also contributing back as part of this contest, and what you're doing is you're having interviews with other designers on your solo interviews blog. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned when we were chatting previously that one of the really cool things from the contest was the fact that it's not just a contest, it's not just you enter a board game and that's that, but there is a whole community and there's a whole lot of extra things going on. So I kind of felt that I wanted to contribute to that a bit this year. And one of the ideas being kicked around when the contest was about to open was this idea of doing interviews. And to be honest, I think I've stolen the idea of a blogger who's done it in the past, where they just did some kind of very quick, short form text based interviews. And it's been really enjoyable. It's been a really great process. The interviews themselves are kind of really quick to do. They're really short and fast to read. I kind of see them as like the fast food of design interviews, as opposed to like the 3-course meals we get through, for example, your audio chats. So definitely like the McDonald's or the KFC of board game designer interviews. But they're lots of fun. There's some kind of interesting questions, and you just get such a variety of people's experience and people's kind of goals for what they want out of the contest, and how that feeds through into how they've designed the game and how they think about games. It's just absolutely fascinating reading all the different responses as they come through. And I've been lucky that I've had absolutely tremendous response, to the point where the blog's been updated pretty much every 2 to 3 days in order to make sure I can try and get through as many designers and various kind of other participants in the contest before the contest kind of closes towards kind of October time. So there's lots of frequently updated content, really interesting. So I definitely encourage everyone to head over to the Solo Interviews blogs on BGG and catch up on all the various kind of participants, not just the designers, but also we've got interviews, for example, with some of the YouTubers. So it's just a really great mix of people with different viewpoints, different histories, different goals, and it's just fascinating reading.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree on that. I think it's been really interesting reading all the articles that you posted on the blog. So thanks for doing that as well. Great. So Ronan, any final comments before we wrap up this audio chat session?
I don't think so. I think it's been great talking about my history and the various kind of how that's played out in the different games. I just really encourage everyone to play test as much as possible other people's games, really lean into the community aspect of the contest, because it really teaches you that board game design is not a solo pursuit. Even if you're designing a solo board game, there is so much joy to be had by contributing to a community, contributing to other people's games, and seeing other people's games get better as a result of the way you've interacted with it. So get out there and play as much as you can.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ronan, for that. So that's it for today's audio chat session. Thank you very much for joining us, Ronan, and thank you for everyone for listening.
Thanks a lot.
I will try to have more interesting chat sessions with other designers that are participating in the 2021 Solo Print and Play Board Game Design Contest on Board Game Geek. So keep listening. Thank you.